G'day legends, I hope that you're having a great day and a great weekend, and a big hello from our special guest, Bez, today. So we do have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk, of course, a detailed look over the maps and using multiple maps. We're going to talk about F-16s, Patriot systems, and what Zelensky has said. We'll look at targeting both in Kharkiv and in Belgorod. We're going to look at multiple pieces of footage there in residential areas and the implications around this. We're going to talk about land concessions, but where we opened the video yesterday is where we're going to open again, with extraordinary claims coming from Ukraine at airfields in Russia, saying that up to 19 aircraft had been damaged or destroyed in these mass drone waves that took place. Now, no evidence so far has been provided, leaving some of even the most pro-Ukrainian pages scratching their head, like we have here from NOAA reports. Unfortunately, no damage at Morozovsk either. I wonder if the GUR will release anything to back up their claims. And what we're going to do is, of course, we're going to look at these images released by Brady Afric. Brady Afric does a fantastic job geolocating and mapping things like defensive works, but also satellite imagery like this. Now, of course, he's not the satellite, but purchasing and putting it out there. Now, on the left, we have April the 4th. The attack happened April the 5th. And then on the right, we have then April the 6th. Now, in these, you can see some slight changes. Look at number 3 here. We do see that there are 2 aircraft have been moved here, but there isn't any visible sign of damage to these. These are aircraft which are deployed currently for a war. They're going to be moving, and aircraft move around. But what we were looking for in these maps is we're looking for something that indicates some sort of battle damage, whether it is debris falling, it's fire, it's airframes that have been there, it's scarring on the tarmac, anything. And there is none of this. This up here is just a cloud shadow. So there is nothing that shows any evidence of this actually happening at this airbase. And at this airbase, what we were told was 6 airframes were destroyed and up to 8 were damaged. 20 people were killed, with multiple pilots as well. And these images just are not backing up that claim at all. And we seemingly say every day that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And asking for evidence is never a bad thing. It never is. And the invisible front line of this war is the informational space. The informational space, the propaganda, the misinformation, the disinformation, the belief, all of this, whether it's from Twitter to spoken to state television, anything on both sides, is the invisible war that's going on, that's being fought, and is just as important, if not more important, than just actual hard frontline movements. Now, what I always say about this is everyone has a smartphone. There are drones everywhere. There's security cameras everywhere, and things come out very quickly. We had footage of this air assault as it was coming. And whoever is making these claims, it is in their best interest to show proof of the damage as soon as possible. Not only to back up the claims, but for the propaganda purpose of this as well. When Ukraine or Russia damage an important target, we'll see 50 different angles of it, and it'll be shared 1 million times to capitalize on it. Think of when the first Abrams or Leopard got hit. You use that. But when claims are made with no evidence more than 48 hours later, well, doubt has to start creeping in. And this is no different to the 11 Su-34s that were claimed to be hit weeks ago. And the funny thing is, since then, the Air Force spokesman has been sacked, but we haven't had any more claims of these going down. So that's, I guess, interesting. So let's have a look at what happened. So we see this. These were being released all the time. This is Feb 29th, that there was almost a dozen Su-34 in February alone, with very, very little evidence of, well, that amount. It was 11 in 11 days, I believe. And then, so that was Feb the 29th, I believe, yes. And then we saw then, without any grounds given or provided, then Lieutenant General, Commander of the Air Force, then was sacked. So from the source that Yuri Inhart, we speak about a lot, spokesman of the Air Force, had been fired. So, yeah, we don't know. I'm just putting things together. But Russian and Ukrainian reputations for claims of these, in my opinion, are just absolutely in the gutter. A lot of people just don't believe whatever comes out, whether it's Russian MOD, Ukrainian MOD. without physical evidence of it, people get very, very suspicious at the moment, and it is decreasing, which Russia can sustain this because they're not reliant on outside support. It's all in-house. Ukraine, on the other hand, they are wholly reliant on support from outside, mostly the US support, which of course we know is hanging in the balance and will hang in the balance again later in the year, which is approaching bloody quickly. We're in April for those elections. So maybe some officials and propagandists just drink the Kool-Aid and believe any claim that comes over the corporate media's desks. But I do believe that most people are actually above this, and in countries with democratically elected officials, this distrust is not going to trend well. So I just want to talk about one more thing. I spoke about yesterday that the drones, they do fly very slowly and you can get things out of the way of them, get air defense going. So a lot of people have been talking about this. Ukraine's long-range drones are totally unsuitable for targeting Russian air bases, that the ATACMS are essential for this mission. Now, fair enough, but this bloke here should know different. Of course, this is a US system. The US has been very, very stern on that their systems are not to be used inside Russian territory, and that they don't back when Ukraine is even targeting with their own systems into Russian territory as well. So we're not going to see that happen, but something like that, if there can be a domestically produced product, would be far more deadly against these air bases. But these air bases, why are the attacks not successful? Because, well, on most attacks not successful, we have seen success attacks, because of course these are strategically the most important bases for Russia in this war. So they're going to have all the allocation of air defense sitting there. Now, we need to speak a little bit about air defense because Zelensky has come out with a couple of things over the past day. So let's look at what was said. So on national television on April the 6th, he's talked about this. I'll not tell you how many Patriot systems we have. I can say that to cover Ukraine completely in the future, it is preferable to have 25 Patriot systems with 6 to 8 batteries each. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he means here because each Patriot battery has then 8 launchers. These launchers can hold up to 4 missile interceptors each. So not really sure with the 25 and 8. I get the 8. I don't really know on the 25 what he's talking about. Are they the launchers? Are they interceptors? We're not sure. But 8 batteries would be 224 actual interceptors. Something we need to remember on this is a Patriot battery is about $1.1 billion for the battery, and each interceptor sits around that $2 million mark. Now, the US has about 50 total batteries and around about 1,000 interceptor missiles, although the actual numbers on interceptors vary massively for upgrades, variants, all of this from 450 up to 1,200, especially because some variants will be needed for then hypersonic ballistic missiles as well, and others won't work. So it does sit around that. But there is this idea that these batteries are not needed in places around the world that actually have Patriots, that they should all then be sent to Ukraine because Ukraine is the only place on Earth or in the West that is being hit with ballistic missiles at all. Now, this is sort of both right and wrong. Yes, Ukraine may have ballistic missiles fired on it, but this doesn't mean that other systems are just sitting around in a shed. Air defense is one of the most sought after items in the world right now, and the US and other countries have many systems deployed worldwide protecting airfields and bases. It's not like you can just pack all those up and then send them. But the president also stressed that the territories near the front line and Ukrainian forces need combined defense to oppose attacks conducted with aerial guided bombs. So we're talking about then the FABs. Such defenses must include air defense systems, fighter jets, and own anti-guided aerial bomb weapons, which are currently being developed. So anything domestically developed to take your reliance off the West, off NATO, is where Ukraine need to head with a lot of this, because that could be shaky at best into the future. The president added in 2024, Ukraine's partners could provide 10% of the modern air fleet stock, which Ukraine expects to receive in the future. Ukraine knows for sure how much it needs to repel Russian Federation's attacks. So they say, we know how much we need. This is around about what we need. This is what we're getting. And it's hard. It's hard to sum up what this 10% of fleet. So this page here quotes him saying, we still don't have enough aircraft. This year, West will give us 10% of the amount of fighter jets we need. So we don't know. We know that the amount of jets that Ukraine will get is in the dozens. It's somewhere between 50 and 70 as far as my memory goes. People have said that they need up to, like, say, 200. So is it talking that maybe they're going to get 20? A lot of people were banking on that Ukraine would get that full allotment, those dozens and dozens by mid-year this year, which we're getting very close to. What difference will they make? Well, we'll see when they're there, although there are some doubts around this, but only 10% this year. That's something new that's come out as well. So we don't really know, but we know that every official in Ukraine right now is talking about the need for air defense, and F-16s are not going to be the equivalent air defense that something like these Patriot air defense batteries will be. Yes, they can be used in that role, but as far as time on target, then cost effectiveness, all of this, and as well, the risk of these being in the air is massive. But we will see. But there's some big requirements then put out there as well. Now, what we do need to talk about is Kharkiv and Belgorod region, and this will sort of all go in. As I spoke yesterday, I did say that as we are talking, there is a mass wave of missiles and drones going from Russia into Ukraine. We did know that there was Tu-95s in the air, said to be targeted yesterday as well, but we've got no evidence of that too. And then this has come out from Ukrainian sources overnight, with drones and missiles, a total of 31. So 28 of the 32 Shahed drones were shot down, 0 of the S-300s. Now, it's believed that these S-300s were fired in Kharkiv. What would make sense is the S-300 has a lot less range than a cruise missile. S-300 is air defense system, but can be used in a ground-to-ground way. 2 of all of the then cruise missiles and the 1 caliber, but that none of those S-300s were hit. Now, we have a little bit of footage from some of this, and we need to talk at length about what was hit too. So we have a bit of footage here of said to be the strike in Kharkiv against a system here. Now, this system is said to be a Ukrainian multiple launch rocket system. So we have footage of it then setting up here. And what will this be doing? Well, this multiple launch rocket system in Kharkiv, with the ranges given here, is most likely being used, if it's being set up to be fired, going into Belgorod. And what we do know is that these areas into Belgorod, where Ukraine has had those incursions, and we'll talk at length about that, but in these regions have had multiple launch rocket systems fired into here, and they, by this geolocated footage, has been fired from here inside Kharkiv in residential area. Here what we see is then this is a service station, this is a WOG, and that this is then a mall here. Now, this is nothing new. I know this isn't new to any one of weapons being fired, whether from Russia or Ukraine, in built-up areas. But let's have a look at this then footage. We see the system being set up here. Excuse the music. So we have talked about there is seemingly an increased ISR capability in the air, as well as this freedom of movement of it as well too. So you can see that where the geolocation has come within this road out, then you do see this strike on target here. It's very recognisable to see that cook-off sort of firework display then taking place. And of course, a massive explosion because it's hit something incredibly explosive as well. And we have some more photographs of this taken from a Russian drone here. You can see where this road then is turning out here, said to be this turnout area here. To my eye, these geolocations definitely match, and we are seeing those strikes, the S-300s, whatever, going in and having success in Kharkiv. So military equipment in built-up areas, this has been common since before the war in frontline areas on both sides, and has increased, of course, during the war. Now, this war is the first time we've ever seen like drones in action en masse, and these are providing an infinite amount of ISR and long-range targeting. And I don't know the solution to this with you when you have so much information coming in that there's nowhere to hide. How does that work with the humanitarian laws of armed conflict, residential areas? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not one to speak on this, and I am not going to give a solution to this, but many Human Rights Watch NGOs and myself, especially when I was on the ground there, have been incredibly critical of the use of these areas without providing, in many cases, a way for people to actually leave. And a lot of people had to leave by civilian NGOs or rely on civilian NGOs to then evacuate people from here. It wasn't for the military to do. And we have, say, this from Amnesty International. This was back in 2022 and caused a massive stir. I've spoken at length about this article before, but we've documented a pattern of Ukrainian forces putting civilians at risk and violating the laws of war when they operated in populated areas. Being in a defensive position does not exempt the Ukrainian military from respecting international humanitarian law. Now, many people will say, well, Ukraine's been illegally invaded, therefore there's no legal bounds on Ukraine. Well, that is just bullshit. That doesn't trend. That you're still governed by these laws of which you've signed onto. And yes, we know that this in populated areas is happening in both sides, and I'll talk about this more so. And there's more here in this Amnesty article. You can see why this caused such a stir. Amnesty International research witnessed Ukrainian forces using hospitals as de facto military bases in 5 locations, and the Ukrainian military has routinely set up bases in schools and towns and villages in Donbass in the Mykolaiv area. Now, why are things like schools used? Well, big open area to put people, and that I have footage inside of school of military equipment there, and there was dead Russians actually in the school at the time when I was filming this. Now, you would be, of course, very naive to think that Russia hasn't done this in places like Donetsk or occupied areas for years. Now, people always talk about the shelling into Donetsk as well as the Russian military in Donetsk. I was very intrigued by these claims being made and what is actually truthful here. So when I was in Ukraine, before the restrictions came into this app, I actually went on Tinder near the front line, near Donetsk city. So it was within the bounds of Donetsk, Tinder Pro. And I matched as many people as I could, guys and girls, and struck up a conversation about these claims. Is it true that there are shelling into civilian areas? And also, is it true that there is Russian military build-up in civilian areas in this area where you are? And both sides came with a yes. Of course, there's a lot of skepticism about me. Look at me, an Australian fucking journalist talking there, but both came out to be a yes. Now, talking more about just north of Kharkiv Oblast, we have then Belgorod region. Footage has come out today from a GoPro captured of a fighter that is said to be killed of an American operating on this front line here.
About this, listen.
Coordinated and all the fucking dudes are wearing yellow.
Yeah, I do appreciate that.
I fucking like that.
So, of course, English-speaking Americans in that video. Now, I think I thought this was all known. Everyone's saying this is like, oh, look at this. I thought this was well known that there were, Western guys operating in these legions, crossing then into places, into Russia, in Belgorod, things like this. I thought this was widely known. But at the end of that video, I'll put on the Telegram, there is an artillery strike or a mortar strike, I can't tell, that does seem to take out then those guys at the end, and is said to be off a captured GoPro. But more evidence there are Western volunteers crossing into Russian territory, and it rebutes the claim that it's just Russians who have switched sides going across. We do know there was Poles there. I know Westerners who have done shit there, so I didn't think this was anything new, but apparently it is to people. Maybe it's people like me have failed to report on it then correctly. So Stoltenberg, of course, someone we speak about a lot, he's the NATO Secretary General, has spoken, and this is being reported by RBC Ukraine. I can't really find this anywhere else, but it does talk about what is said about then the end of the war. Quote, even if we believe and hope that the war will end in the near future, we need to support Ukraine for many years to build their defenses to deter future aggression. Now, one thing I can say is this war is not going to end in the near future. Both sides have a hell of a lot of more rope to go before everything starts falling apart. And Ukraine will need decades of support following this war wherever it ends. And it could be greatly extended if land in the south isn't then fought back. Now, at the end of the day, it has to be Ukraine that decides what kind of compromises they're willing to do. We need to enable them to be in a position where they actually achieve an acceptable result around the negotiating table. So this here is very interesting, talking about compromises and an acceptable result for negotiations. This is something that isn't spoken about much about, especially from guys like this in NATO, about what is an acceptable result in negotiations and what compromise is willing to be made. Now, you and I, we know that there's going to have to be some compromise at some point by both Russia and Ukraine in this war, unless we just fight to the last bloody man. What is acceptable? Well, we don't know. But also, we know that Ukraine and Stoltenberg, they're looking for Ukrainian entry into NATO. And for NATO entry conditions, having ongoing war, land that is occupied, all this doesn't really work out. So to enter NATO, there's going to have to be some either compromise made or fight back then all of that land. Something with NATO as well is, of course, all countries need to agree, and you're going to have big problems from Hungary and Turkey. But it was just interesting to see that him actually saying and using this sort of language. Now, Zelensky's chief of staff, Yermak, has then said this as well. The Russians are not interested in any negotiations, although we do see Putin talk a hell of a lot and other officials about open to negotiations. They want the capitulation of Ukraine, but it will never happen. All of us who are in Ukraine, we will not accept any compromise on our independence, on our territorial integrity, on our freedom. And this president will never agree to anything like the Minsk agreements or a frozen conflict. No, I'm sure about that. Now, the conflict is very frozen, but what he's more meaning is it's just two defense lines, sort of similar to post-14 to 2022. That and no compromises on territorial integrity. But we actually do have from the Kiev Institute of Research, the KIIS, from here, we do have these that have come out in December. And this, they release every month up until December, and then they've just stopped. But with these statements regarding to possible compromises to achieve peace with Russia, do you agree to a great extent that the orange here, peace and preserve independence, as Ukraine should give up some of its territories, and under no circumstances in the blue that they should give up some territories in the grey, difficult to say. So what you can see here is in December that it has been growing a hell of a lot since September 22. Now, September 22 to December 22, that is when we saw Kharkiv and Kherson offensives there and success there as well. So of course, there is, of course, there's a lot of people saying that there should be no requirement to give up because look at what is happening. But we can see, as there hasn't been much movement through the counteroffensive, post-counteroffensive, and then now what we're seeing, that this is growing more than double. And of course, we have seen a slight shift up in difficult to say as well. And that is very interesting. You're talking 20% of people that were actually then asked about this. So then we see this broken down, but by regional dimension, where people actually live. And of course, you'll see the areas that are least affected, like the West and the center, being the most against concessions, at least mostly throughout this. And of course, the most affected is the East and the South. And you can see the change here. Now, the West has had a massive change in December 23. Not that much in the center, but a huge change in October, December in the south, as well as an increase in the east. So this is important to break down too, of who is where for the most amount of effect as well. Like I've spoken about, that Kiev and Lviv are pretty much normal cities. I've done some videos, I've talked about it at length, that you could go there and not really realize as much going on. And people love to show those videos of people partying and whatever, but that is just part of it. Now, we are going to have a look at the maps and go over what is happening, as there is some interesting things in the front. So, of course, here is Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22 and the purple since 2014. Now, let's speak at first about Bakhmut. Now, I don't believe there's any shift on this map here. No, just a small amount of grey zone. There's no Syriac or NOAA reports map for this. But what we do know is what we've reported on is coming into the first blocks of Chasiv Yar. There is footage of Russian armor moving into these areas, although it's said to be stable here by the Ukrainian side. But I got this of a friend who's there saying enemy forces are in Chasiv Yar, but only remnants of their assault force. There are no support, and they are being eliminated as soon as they are seen. They're trying to sneak out at night to get what they can from their dead comrades in the rear on this road that goes to Kromove. So we're talking this road through here, what was once the road of life. Dead enemy and AFVs, armoured fighting vehicles, and MTBs everywhere that we can see. Just such a waste of life and resources as this assault continues into Chasiv Yar. Now, where we will go, we'll just go to the north of here a little bit into Terny. Now, there's always rumours. It seems like every couple of days, the pro-Russian accounts is like, Russians are in Terny, but never seems to be that way. And we'll just speak about this quickly from Suriak as well. He says this: rumors that Russian troops managed to enter Terni were totally false. In fact, the axis from which the Russian army had supposedly entered was an axis on which they were already retreating. After an unsuccessful attack, the Ukrainian army launched its counterattack and regained lost positions, some previously grey areas. So in this tree line we see here, that has been pushed back in here. There is no change in what is being shown here. I actually believe it's showing less than the deep state MOD map is showing. But where we need to then push down into is, of course, Avdiivka and what is happening in here. Now, what we do see is this shift around Badachi as well as near Novokarnovi. We see just an increase in grey zone out there. That isn't replicated across any other maps. But what we do like is then this is shown across multiple maps, this increase in Badachi. So we have NOAA reports. Here we have Badachi, this increase here. So being shown very, very similarly between those two maps, of course, both pro-Ukrainian maps. But then we do have in this map here, Surak, we do see this is Badachi, this is Stepovi, same increase in territory around there. Russian army made minimal advances north of Badachi. Battles are fierce in the Badachi-Semenivka-Orlivka sector, where there are heavy casualties on both sides. There hasn't been too much movement in this Orlivka-Semenivka-Badachi Todnenki front, but what we do know is the attacks here are absolutely brutal, and to make any ground here with defensive works and open ground is going to be incredibly difficult and both incredibly savage. Now, I'll just move down. There's no change in Pervomayevsky. Krasnohorivka, on this map, there's shown no changes, and we do have one from Suriak talking in here. At one point, it did look like Russia was about to enter here, but the break-in, same as we saw in Novomayevka, Marienka, Hirovka, all these areas, the break-in is incredibly costly. Once you can get into these areas, it sort of frees up a bit, but the break-in from open terrain into closed terrain is the hardest part. So, showing this situation, West Donetsk, after several weeks of fighting, the Russian army failed in its attempt to consolidate in the south of Krasnohorivka and retreated to the outskirts from where it attacked Ukrainian army's positions inside the city. In the last 2 days, Russian troops have begun to press from the railway line in an area with better cover, but more heavily fortified from the south. So down the rail line that is sitting here. Of course, it's purple, like I said. This has been held since 2014. Better cover down here in tree lines, whatever, but not achieving then that break-in. We do know there's a hell of a lot of fabs being dropped on this area. Now down into Novomayevka here, we do see just a slight shift in the grey zone on this map, then taking up most of Novomayevka, but we do have some NOAA reports, a map here. So let's line up where this crossing is here. So see this road, and then this is where they said to be up to. See where this is? So I'm trying to line you up with where the maps are showing. So even this Ukrainian map here is showing it is more so like this, through this area. Across this road, probably a bit more than I've actually drawn on that map. So saying that Russia has a lot more control in here than the deep state map is showing. Let's then have a look on the Suriak map, see what this is saying. This is saying more similarly to the NOAA reports map that we just looked at, if you can line up where the reservoir is, but of course more control out just to the north of the reservoir. But during the last 3 days, Russian army captured half of this dashes north of Novomayevka. That's what we're speaking about. In addition, Russian forces began new attacks south of the locality towards the trench system. Due to the pressure, Ukrainian army began the withdrawal from new parts of the center, which has almost been taken by the Russian forces. Only 30% of Novomayevka remains under Ukrainian control. This map is showing, though, that remaining 30% is grey zone. So it's not under really anyone's control. That would be my takeaway from there. Now, we don't see any other changes down in these corners here, nor in the Uruzani front. But what we do see is an increase in Russian control in this Robotny front, with an increase over these paddocks. So, of course, what Russians are trying to do is recapture the defensive line between Verbovi and Robotny here. Now, of course, these maps have shown very, very different. NOAA reports doesn't have a map on this area, but this same change in these paddocks here, so this change happened. 100%, the change here, that is lining up. So we know that Russia did increase control in that area. But what is showing very different is between here and down in between where this sort of nub comes out where it's grey, that Surak is saying then that is captured by the Russians and they've got that area of the Surovikin line. During the last 6 days, Russian army put pressure on the Ukrainian army along the axis northwest of Verbove, where troops made some advances. So we know that advance happened, but the rest of the map where it is isn't really lining up. Now, Legends, I believe that is all that we've got. I hope you're having a great weekend. I hope you're looking after yourself. If you'd like to support me or join the PMC, there's all their links down below. But look after yourself and have a great week. Okay, see ya.